For those that are joining us with the video today, my name is Mike Fulton. I'm here with Dan Warfield. Dan is one of the world's foremost thought leaders in enterprise architecture and IT for IT. Dan is also one of the best architecture trainers that I've ever seen in action. Dan and I figured we'd get together and talk today a little bit about one of the questions that we get asked on a fairly regular basis, which is, what is TOGAF certification? Is it something I need? And if it is, why do I need it and how do I get it?
There are several different flavors of TOGAF certification. The one that I focus on is called TOGAF Enterprise Architecture Practitioner. This is a
Okay.
certification that is offered by the Open Group, which is a standards body that was created in the 1990s when enterprise architecture was formalized as a thing. And it was because CEOs, I didn't say CIOs, I said CEOs, were waking up in the middle of the night going, I hope my $100 million IT project is actually not going to sink my whole company and take me down a hole that I'll never climb out of, because that was happening a little too often. The reason for that was that IT was getting more complicated. People were doing bigger, riskier projects that were more and more complicated. And some of them were fantastic, and everybody wanted one of those, but often they actually failed in a really dramatic way. I got into this in that period because I was working for a company that, due to $100 million spent on something that was never going to work, had to lay off several thousand people and sell off part of the company. When I do training for TOGAF certification, some people say, well, this is all very abstract, isn't it? It is, but it's also very important, because this is not just something you do to have a nice job drawing pictures and things. It is actually something that affects people's lives. It affects your company, and it affects the livelihood of the people working around you. So it matters whether you do it right.
Yeah, so to that point, Dan, yeah, architecture mattered when IT was big and complex and whatnot. We're in a different world today. Why does architecture and specifically TOGAF matter today?
Architecture is bigger and more complex than it ever was. IT is. We have more technology stuff than we've ever had. It is increasingly complicated. There's a new book that was published by the Open Group, uh, Ecosystems Architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're talking about is the fact that the number of factors that we have to consider when we're designing a complex technology solution, because of the way that the things we're using are so interconnected with things that we have no control over, that it is actually impossible now to try to do what we were able to do 30 years ago, to do a coherent design in which everything was accounted for. That's no longer possible. We have the tech stacks that are too deep and too complicated. We have too many vendors that are sitting underneath our nice solution. We have too many third parties that we rely on. We're connected to everything everywhere. So it's not less complicated. It's so much more complicated that traditional enterprise architects sometimes have their heads exploding, because they're trying to control everything and it can't be done anymore.
So maybe I'm a developer who's looking to continue to grow my career. Maybe I'm already an architect, but am struggling with some of the complexity that you talked about. Can you tell me why TOGAF certification matters to me if I'm one of those people?
The first thing on the list, and thing that a lot of people care about, is money. You'll take my class for 4 days, then you'll take an exam. If you pass the exam, then you get the certification. You actually get two certifications. If you take the course from the live instructor, you get the TOGAF EA Practitioner Certificate, but you also get the TOGAF Applied Practitioner Badge, which you can only get by taking a course, an accredited course from an actual person. You can't get it by just studying on your own. Those things are worth money in the marketplace. On average, depending on what industry you're working in, you'll see a 12% bump in your earnings just because you have the certificate. There are a lot of public sector and large companies that require a TOGAF certification as a filter. There are 100,000 people with TOGAF certifications. So if I want an enterprise architect, and I know I'm going to get 500 applications, I can put a requirement in there that says must be TOGAF certified. Then 300 of those people will go away. It makes my hiring job easier. So that's another reason to have the certificate.
So you mentioned if you're a technical expert, TOGAF certification may or may not be for you. Do I need to be a technical expert to get value out of TOGAF certification? Do I need to not be a technical expert to get value out of TOGAF certification?
Enterprise architect is not primarily a technology job, it's primarily a business job.
Okay.
What you will learn in an enterprise architecture course, like a TOGAF certification course, is a methodology and an approach and a way of structuring information for dealing with two things. One of them is the organization you're in has someone who wants a change. There's something wrong with the way we're doing business today. We want it to be different. We want to go into a new market. We need a CRM system that does things that the current one doesn't do. We need to change the business process in the customer service rep space. We need a different logistics process because we're spending too much moving things from A to B. These are the kinds of requests for change that you get. So you need to be able to apply a professional way of working with things like that in a systematic way to structure the question correctly and then to describe the gaps correctly between what's going on now and what's desired. And when you do that, you'll find that uh, there are contradictions, there are unknowns, there are questions. So a lot of the job is interacting with the stakeholders for the change, making sure they understand what the gaps really are, what the
Mm-hmm.
implications really are, what the risks are, and helping them decide what to do. That's the first part of the job. The second part of the job is governance. And what I mean by governance is basically two kinds of things. One is to make sure that when people are implementing a transformation, that they stay on course, that they don't drift off into doing things that nobody wanted, that they don't change the specification in a way that creates risk or degrades value. That's one kind of governance. And that needs to be pretty thoughtfully applied only to things where one of those two things is a significant issue. The other kind of governance is governance of the all the things that are in production because, and this is where architecture adds a lot of value, we spend $20 million implementing something. We believed at some point that we're going to get all the $20 million back every year once it's done. Architecture governance is about measuring whether that actually happened and
Okay.
saying, okay, so we've done all of this stuff. We have all of these things in production. Let's analyze whether they are delivering the value we thought, the service levels we hoped for, working as well as we thought, attracting the number of customers we thought, and if not, that's another set of gaps between what is and what is wanted. TOGAF is a methodology for doing that kind of work consistently, effectively, and with a data model that is reusable and that you can automate so you can scale up your knowledge.
You've done a lot of architecture work over the years, as have I. Can you maybe give us one example of a project where you applied TOGAF and how it worked and what the result was?
The thing I did recently was for a UK central government department that I'm not allowed to talk about. And their question was, and this often happens in enterprise architecture, their question was a feasibility question. So what they wanted was a high level business architecture for how they could integrate with about 15 other departmental systems in the government to collect data from each of them into one central repository so they could analyze some things about those systems. And so the question is, how would you do that? What are the important things that we have to worry about there? What is it that will have to happen at a high level What's the minimum set of changes and what requirements would we put against it? We interviewed some of the people in the other departments and said, do you have this data? It's management data about their systems. You have this important system in your department. What are all the technologies that it uses? Can you name them? Can you describe the tech stack so that we can understand it better? And sometimes the answer was no, we have no idea. That would be a major archaeology project.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the answer is yes, we have that in systems that we're running today. However, you're asking us to build an integration that we don't have time for. Going back to my customer, I said, these are the kinds of integrations you need. You would want them all to be done in the same way. From an architectural level, you would have a single type of integration, and the implementation on each of the endpoints would have to be specified so that they can present data in a common format to you. But more importantly, you also have a bunch of security requirements that you have to address right away because each one of these departments has its own systems, it has its own security, they're government departments. Some of them have very serious security concerns about access to their data. And just because you're another government department doesn't mean that you are seen as reliable. So you're going to have to figure out how to do that. And they will also want to see what you're doing with their data. So part of your top level design is to show them what you're doing with their data, and they will want to know how that will happen. So there's a number of considerations like that. We drew a high level solution concept diagram to show how these integrations would work, who the key stakeholders would be, which included a lot of departmental CISOs and
Mm-hmm.
some other people who would have to be involved in doing the actual more detailed design. It was not a technical design. It was a business design for if you're going to do this, this is how it would work.
And it sounds like TOGAF would have been a really valuable methodology to lead you through that process as you were going through that. So it sounds like TOGAF certification would be really important for someone looking to up level their career in this way. How does somebody go about getting TOGAF certification?
Whatever you do, you have to take the exam and you have to pass the exam. One thing you can do is you can just go do self-study. You can watch
Mm-hmm.
YouTube videos, you can read the TOGAF 2,000 pages of information. If you do that, none of that material you'll be studying will give you very much information about how do you actually do this work. And the exam will be testing you on did you read the book? Did you remember a lot of the complicated vocabularies and things like that? So whether you actually understand it or not is, not really part of that question. The second way you can do it is you can go to people who might think they're my competitor. I don't think they're my competitor. There are companies that do all kinds of training and they get somebody who's able to read the slides without slurring their words too much. The other way to do it is to learn from somebody who actually has done this kind of work and understands what's important and how to do it. The TOGAF standard is a cookbook. It's full of recipes, checklists, uh, structures to know about, and it tells you how to use the cookbook in certain situations. And the exam is really about, do you know what's in the cookbook? That's the foundation part. Can you remember it and play it back in a multiple choice question? And the practitioner part is given a very narrowly defined scenario based on the method you should be using and the way you should approach the work, what's the best solution, A, B, C, or D, to this scenario? That's the exam. The cookbook is a starting point.
Right.
You'll not be an expert because you read the cookbook. You have to do cooking. There's more to do after that.
So what I hear you saying, Dan, is that in your course, not only do you provide the student with the information that they need to be able to understand TOGAF, to be able to learn the vocabulary and to be able to pass the exam, but you go several steps beyond that to really help them bring the material to life in a real world context so that they can understand how to more appropriately apply different parts of TOGAF in different situations. In essence, rather than helping someone memorize a cookbook, you're helping teach someone to be a chef. Is that what I hear?
It is. Part of what you have to be able to do is adapt the recipe to the situation.
Makes sense. So really being able to um, apply the cookbook, TOGAF, into whatever situation you might be faced with as an architect is one of the key outcomes that people get out of your class.
So they learn, what does a practitioner need to know to start working as an enterprise architect. We're not training people how to be the chief architect. We're training them how to join the team.
So I think this is probably a good place for us to stop. I know you and I could go much, much deeper
Hmm.
on how to stand up an EA team, and maybe we'll do that in a future video. But for today's conversation, I think folks have a pretty good sense of TOGAF certification, what it is, why they should leverage it, and how they can go about getting it.
Thank you, Mike. We'll see you on the other side.